need to go,
yes.
Go
now
forward.
You can go.
Yeah. So despite the fact that, I had a lot going on in my life that were like the comorbidities essentially that you see with so many young people, especially like the big spike in young girls who are going into this, where it's like, okay, we got ADHD, depression, anxiety, and there's a whole other list of them. And for some reason, and I guess another big one is like any kind of sexual trauma as well. And for some reason, those are kind of like pushed aside and not dealt with at all almost the minute you bring up like the gender thing. Even the question of, oh, I think I might be this. And that really is because of the model we have here in the US now, is the affirmation model, where essentially you take like a declaration of transness at face value and almost assume that any other problems going on are because of that declaration. And therefore this needs to be addressed first as the major thing, which is why you see such a push for almost immediate medicalization.
And is that what happened to you?
Yeah, it really did feel like, despite the fact that I had all these other things going on, as soon as I told a therapist that, I don't like these parts of my body, I think I might be transgender, it was almost like that was just taken and ran with in terms of like medical care, where it was, okay, your other issues are probably caused by the dysphoria from this, so we're gonna focus on this one big issue. And of course, then you have the issue of the fact that my parents were they were like emotionally blackmailed with the whole, do you want a dead daughter or a living son? Do you want to be planning a transition or a funeral?
Wow.
Which is not how medical professionals should be talking. That's how an activist talks.
And that was when you were 15?
This would have been when I was 15.
And so that's even, so no one's really talking about this. And if someone came to me as a mom, and I've got girls age 11, 14, 16, and 20, and I had no awareness of this issue. And someone said, do you want an alive son or a dead daughter? I would be blown away. That would be shocking for me to hear. Do you know anything now, because you do a lot of work with Do No Harm and a lot of other organizations you've spoke, you're aware now that these studies about basically the emotional blackmail, if you don't do this, we'll commit suicide, or telling parents, if you don't do this, they'll commit suicide. Are you aware of the validity of these statistics that they throw around?
They are not credible when you actually look into it. This risk that they're putting out. Not to mention the fact that we know how to help someone with suicidal ideation, and it has never been to throw plastic surgery in their path.
Yeah.
We know how to protect kids from themselves when they are having these feelings. And it is strange that in this one case that is seemingly like disregarded, and they're put down a completely separable permanent medicalization path that involves drastic physical interventions.
Yeah,
because
if a kid would have said, "You have to, I'm anorexic, and unless you let me continue to be anorexic, I'll kill myself," no one would have said, "Okay, well, let us help you with that."
Yeah, no one would have. If an anorexic teenager was like, if you do not affirm my anorexic identity, I will kill myself. You need to give me liposuction. That person would be committed into the hospital so they could get better.
Yeah.
And if somebody, and now we've kind of just made it so that these people that are taking advantage of kids in a vulnerable state, they're not held accountable for doing these things. And so, I mean, I heard Scarlett mention something about Do No Harm. I don't know if that's an organization that, like, because that's like a medical term usually, right? Like, or an oath that they're supposed to take. You're not supposed to do any harm. And so it seems to me like that has gone out the window when it comes to transgenderism and what we're doing to kids. So So do you want to, so you started talking about getting surgery and stuff. Do you want to talk a little bit more about how you started to transition, what was actually done to you?
Yeah, so I think I got, I don't know where it cut off last time, but I got to the point where, like I said, I kind of, whenever the issue of gender stuff was brought up, every other issue I was dealing with at the time seemingly got pushed aside. And it was really affirmed down this path. It ended up with me seeing a therapist that specializes in gender diverse youth, is the term she uses. And learning now that essentially the medical professionals I went to, like looking at them now, they're heavily biased towards activism. I would just consider them activists that happen to go to medical school at this point.
Wow.
And it ended up with the very first medical intervention I ever had was a double mastectomy at 16. And so surgery was the first step in my case. There was no, after surgery, I was started on cross-sex hormones and took testosterone for 4 years. But the very first step that they went to for me was surgery, because at the time I saw my chest as the biggest issue because it was the most like obvious thing and I was uncomfortable with it.
How long did it take? How many therapy sessions before they just said, okay, let's do a double mastectomy?
It would have been, let me think, around like I maybe a little over a year with this therapist. And mind you, she was an affirmative therapist. So it wasn't really, oh, I can tell you have like trauma here. That's maybe contributing to why you want to get rid of your chest. We need to deal with that. Mm-hmm. Instead, it was the reason you're having issues is you're trans, and so we're gonna go with that on this issue, essentially.
And how did you feel after you had that surgery?
I mean, there definitely is like a heavy, I suppose, placebo effect, but also one thing that I like to bring up is the fact that I was binding my chest essentially every day for like 8 hours or more before I had surgery. So of course, if you have something literally crushing your rib cage and you're led to believe that, oh, there is this like magical thing that will make it so you no longer have to have this, you no longer have to wear a binder, but you can still have a flat chest. Of course, that's going to feel like a weight, literally like a weight lifted off of your chest.
So for a year, you were social transitioning and wearing a binder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, basically.
Wow.
And so of course, for that first little time, it's like, okay, yeah, this feels good. It's you know, especially when you're led to believe that this is the only option to make yourself feel better, you're going to put a lot of mental energy and put a big stake in, yes, this will make me feel better. Because you don't really have a choice.
When did you start cross-sex hormones then?
So I had surgery in July of 2018, and I started cross-sex hormones in November of 2018.
And what happened when you started to take those?
So what happened with that is you essentially go through, I don't like phrasing like this, but like the closest thing a female body could go through to male puberty, even though when you look at it, it is a lot more like a weird twisted version of menopause than it is male puberty.
So what happened? What did you experience?
So as a result of taking cross-sex hormones for that long, I have, my voice dropped. I have an Adam's apple. I gained a lot more muscle, body hair, facial hair, hair loss. I'm trying to think, fat redistribution on my body.
Really?
Acne. My skin texture changed. My hair texture changed. It affected even how I processed emotions. Mm-hmm. It's a lot. It stopped my period, even though before I was on T, I didn't even really have one anyway, because when I had expressed discomfort about having it due to just general young teenage not knowing what to do when you first get that, and then also being very depressed before I even started with the gender stuff. So you combine those two, and that ended up with me being on birth control to completely skip my period. So even before I went on to testosterone, I wasn't having one. Then testosterone essentially took over and stopped it more. So that there was.
I've never heard of something where a whole medical team is actively working with a young child to prevent puberty instead of working with them to accept puberty and to like help them discover what's good about it, just to kind of get them through the hard time, but to actually just prevent puberty in that way. I didn't know, like give you birth control, so to medically stop your period, then a binder, which is uncomfortable, probably
it's dangerous.
It changes the shape of your chest. This is just horrifying. And then a double mastectomy. And when you took those drugs, did they tell you all the things that would happen to you? Did they tell you what the side effects would be?
I got a list. I'm looking because I'm seeing if I could grab the folder with it off my bookshelf. But I got essentially a list of, so I was 16 at the time, but I essentially got a list of what would happen, and it listed not all of the side effects I experienced from it, not everything I went through. It listed some of them in like one column, and then it went to when you can expect to see these changes, and then essentially are these permanent or not. And on the are these permanent, a lot of them were just like variable and they don't know, which like looking back, not a great confidence builder with that.
Yeah.
Right. But it was really one of those things where it's like also like, yes, they gave me a list, but also I was 16. I couldn't comprehend the long-term impacts of what it meant to be like having fertility issues at 16. Because
usually you're not thinking about like that kind of thing.
Of course, I didn't want kids at 16. I was a 16-year-old. I would like it.
Right.
It would be more concerning if there was a 16-year-old who did want children.
Yeah.
You know, like it's
You're
a
still
very
trying to be a kid at that point.
Yeah, it is a very normal thing to not want kids as like a young teenager, or at least feel like I don't have the like long-term comprehension skills to think about this. And it's very odd that the medical community was like, yeah, but you can consent to possibly sterilizing yourself still. And they took my declaration of not wanting children at 16 at face value.
Because I was the oldest of 4 kids, and I said, I'm never having kids. And I have 5 kids now. You know, I'm never getting married. I'm waiting until I'm 30. And I didn't do that. You know, you're a kid. You don't know what you're talking about. At that point, you're like, oh, I'm just going to have girls, or I'm just going to have boys, or I'm never going to have kids, or you know, you don't know how your life's going to turn out. You can't make those types of long-term decisions. And think about it, because when you started to go through this, it was 2016, 17, 18. How do you feel that now it's getting younger and younger, that they are now performing these, they're starting with puberty blockers, 8 years old, 9 years old. I mean, knowing what you went through, I mean, that must be heartbreaking for you to know that these kids are starting so much younger.
It's really honestly concerning to see almost an entire like sect of the medical field go off the rails from what should be like helping kids learn how to cope and live the best life with the physical reality of going through puberty, and that the body they have, and instead go straight to a drastic physical intervention younger and younger, where we know that like even older teenagers don't have very good long-term comprehension skills when it comes to consequences. Like we know this, even like young 20 somethings, we know this, and it's been like all throughout history, we are aware of this. And all of a sudden we have a medical profession that is essentially saying that like 8-year-olds can make the decision to sterilize themselves.
You know, there was a meme actually that said something with a kid on it saying, I need you to tell me my bedtime, but I can choose my gender. Like you have to tell me when I need to go to bed. But
and that's the part about it, is because in every other realm of children developing, they need boundaries. And yes, they are going to push against those boundaries in a healthy way. But it is up to the adults in the room to teach them, okay, well, here is a healthy way to push against a boundary and get healthy pushback so they can grow in that safe environment. And instead, with this issue, not only have we just straight up taken the boundaries away when it comes to like reasonable pushback and reasonable pushback on both sides, really, in terms of a kid being able to express themselves and the parents being able to like put their foot down and be like, no, we have taken away the boundaries that kids need and replaced it with an experimental medical industry, which is like the nightmare scenario of what you could possibly do. Because it's almost worse than having no boundaries to just have a essentially medical industrial complex that will actively make sure those boundaries can't be put back up.
And for anyone that's watching or this gets shared, what would you say to someone about to embark on this? What are the warnings you would give? What are the long-term effects that maybe they're not taking into account?
I would say for young people specifically, like long-term effects wise, you don't know what you're going to want, especially if you're, young 20-something teenager. You don't know what you're going to want, like 5-10 years down the line. And you may be very, very sure in something right now.
Yep.
But having to possibly deal with the consequences of that later will honestly be devastating. Because, of course, I was, to the point where I was like, okay, I was only given really one path forward. And now I live with like heart issues and joint pain every day. And I don't know if that will ever go away or if I'll just live with this for the rest of my life. I don't know how maybe doing this at such a young age has impacted the length of my life in the long term and made me possibly susceptible to other conditions in the future. I guess in terms of parents that are about to, embark on this, I would just say, let your kid grow up. Let them know they're loved, but don't deny reality because it's not helping your child in the long term. Make sure they're loved. Let them express themselves and make sure they have those healthy boundaries to push against. But saying yes and only yes to someone isn't love. That's enabling, because love is when you are going to have to say no and put your foot down and put up those boundaries and let your kid know that even if, they feel this way, it is an act of love to keep them safe.
Mm-hmm.
To have to, even if it makes them upset, put your foot down.
Do you know how many times I've said to my kids when they have said, well, so-and-so gets to do this. And I would say, well, I love you more. I love you more than their parents because I want to protect you. And usually kids exaggerate. Oh, everyone's doing this. Why can't I? But whenever they would say, well, why can't I have a phone and at all hours when they're young? Well, no, you can't, because I love you too much to let you get trapped by this social media. And I know I've talked to you several months ago, and when I talked to you, it only affirmed to me one of the things that we've done as parents over COVID. We saw, particularly one of our daughters, really, really spiral anxiety and depression. And when we started to investigate how much time that she was spending on her computer, looking into sites and a lot of social media, TikTok, when we thought it was, hey, they're always on their computer because they were doing remote learning. But often she wasn't doing remote learning. She was kind of going down a dark path, and we seized everything and we had to lock everything up and put it away and really monitor their screen time. And they were mad at us. Boy, were they upset. But we have to set boundaries to protect kids, because frankly, if we let our kids decide things, they would eat candy all day. They wouldn't sleep. They wouldn't study. I mean, come on, I think parents know the right thing to do, but I think go into, how did your parents feel? Because you feel they were really manipulated. And I'm bringing on my friend, Shannon Adcock, who she is in Moms for Liberty, Awake, Illinois, and now, yeah, that's better.
Sorry, it got darker outside.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm adding Shannon. Hey, Shannon. And she's also I'm gonna unmute. All right. Can you
Hi.
Yeah, good. So, and also Shannon we started something called Awake Americans, and she's leading the way on that. But I'm really glad you could join us, Shannon. And I had just asked Luka, how did your parents feel in this whole journey? Like, what was their reaction as they saw you after you had the double mastectomy, after you started taking the hormones and you started to experience all these different changes? What was their reaction?
I mean, any doubts they really had throughout the entire process were pretty much quashed under the guise of, no, you have to be supportive or there's a risk of suicide. Wow. And I think that really is the worst part of it, is the fact that, you know, my mom had actual like qualms about the surgery, and she expressed some of them to me, but then she was almost like bullied into going along with it still by my therapist and everyone around her, of like, oh, well, you can't really speak out with any concerns you have about this because of the fact that there is this like risk of suicide, where, you know, looking into it now, not only is that an incredibly like emotionally manipulative way to go about things, but especially when you hear activists talk about it, it goes against every guideline for how you should be addressing suicidal behavior. And
your parents were medical professionals. They still are, right?
Yes, so, both my parents work in the medical industry.
So, so I mean, imagine lay parents, that how easily that they are manipulated and confused, that your parents are medical professionals and they felt the pressure from others in the field, so much so that they felt they had to go along with this.
There was that.
They felt more pressure.
Yeah,
maybe there was more pressure.
There was that, but also like a trust of a medical industry that they genuinely thought had sound evidence behind it and would help me. It's one of those things where it was almost a double-edged sword of because they were both kind of in this area of working in the medical field, then you have almost a trust in that field that like, you're like, well, I know I'm helping people, so I'm going to assume that this other branch would also be helping people and is also based on, sound medicine there. And it's actually interesting because there was a point where they actually put their foot down and said no, and it was on a hysterectomy.
A hysterectomy?
At 18, when I was looking into it, and they put their foot down on it because they know the long-term impacts of what that does to a body. They know I think that was maybe the first thing that shook them a little bit. Like, that is not needed health care for this. That was like, they were like, well, we know what this does to the body. We know the side effects of this. We know what happens to someone, especially young, who gets this done. And it just put them down of like, this is insane. And I do remember, they didn't have all the information about like cross-sex hormones or double mastectomy in this way, the way it was being used in this practice. But they had the information on like what a hysterectomy does to the body in the long term. And I do actually remember sitting in one room of the doctor's office and hearing my dad yelling at the doctor in the other room about, lots of kids have problems. That doesn't mean we sterilize them.
Wow.
And yelling at her about that. And, at the time, of course, I was a teenager, so I was sitting in the other room, like, embarrassed that my parents were yelling in the office, like, oh my God, don't do this. But looking back, I'm forever grateful. Like, any disagreements I had as a teenager with my parents, because, I was a teenager, we fought. That's pretty standard procedure there. But like any disagreements I had with them or have with them now, I am forever grateful that you know, that at least shook them enough to make them put their foot down there looking back.
So there were doctors that were willing and advising you to have a hysterectomy when you were 18 years old.
Yeah, I talked to my doctor about it, the one that was at the gender care clinic, and she, you know, we went through the basics. It wasn't like scheduling anything or anything, but it was going through it with her of like, oh well, I this is like the next step. I want to look into getting this, and she made it sound really easy and like non-consequential in terms of long-term health. She made it sound like it was almost like, oh, you need to get like a tooth pulled because it's bugging you. You know, and she was like, oh well, we can leave your ovaries in, so that way because I had a concern about, well, if I did ever have to stop, you know, taking cross-sex hormones, leaving the ovaries in then, so then my body those would start back up. But also she was like, oh well, we can also leave them in, so then if you do want kids someday, you can just get some weird form of IVF with a surrogate.
Okay.
And it was like looking back, I'm like, this is just one like big chain of more medicalization the farther you get down to it, because not only then would it have been medical complications most likely later in life or even earlier in life from the hysterectomy if I had gotten it, but also then, you know, if I had gotten it and gotten to 20 and realized I want kids, then I have to go through the process of, if I want biological children, I can't carry them. So I would have had to figure that whole mess out, which involves more medical industry involvement.
Can you explain, like, so I was watching like you and several others speaking about their experiences and how I forget who it was, but someone was talking about as a woman who she had detransitioned, that it was like she was going through menopause in her early 20s, and like how that's an effect of what, you know, the damage done. So can you maybe elaborate on that if you experienced anything like that?
Yeah, so coming off of taking testosterone, which was this fall, it feels like you go through essentially when you start testosterone and everything starts to shut down, and while you're on it, you're kind of in a mini menopause. But then when you stop it, it essentially gets a lot worse to the point where you're getting stuff like nausea, hot flashes, night sweats. You know, it's not good. And that was essentially my entire fall as my body was trying to bounce back. But you're either way, you're going to go through that period of where you're in limbo, and it is essentially you're going through a mini menopause.
And you were 19?
Oh, go ahead.
I would have been 20 this fall when that was happening.
How did that affect your schooling? I'm sorry. How did that affect your schooling?
In terms of, I made it through the fall semester okay, and then about like a month and a half into this spring semester, it got to the point where my joint pain and heart issues were just too much that I was like, I need to pull back from classes and just figure out what on earth is going on, because I can't function like this, essentially.
Joint pain and heart pain, what did you go through?
So, and this is an ongoing thing still, is essentially, I just get really bad joint pain to the point where I am, you know, in bed some days and I'm just like, I can't get up and deal with this. And the heart issues is I get it sometimes where it's like palpitations, where it's going really, really fast. It's just, I get little pains. It's all around not good, and finding people that will help you with it after everything I've been through has been very, very hard.
Have you found you've been like, because there's this idea pushed out there that like, if someone's transgender, they're ostracized, they're bullied, they're, you know, cut out of people's lives or whatever. Do you think actually it's almost opposite, where if you want to detransition, have you found that that's been difficult to find the support that you?
Oh, 100%. It was like when I was still identifying trans and going through transition, you have this whole community of like almost pretty much everyone around me that was supportive and, you know, going for it and just like all around, you know, support. And a lot of it for some people, I'm sure was, oh, well, this is like the current thing that we're supporting, so we're going to go with it. But then when I was detransitioning, some of these same people that had been with me, all the way through the transition, and I thought genuinely supported me because they liked me as a person and were my friends, all of a sudden they weren't there anymore, or they were, actively, I don't want to say working against me, but actively like being very unsupportive.
That's horrible.
I'm sorry, Luka. Thank you for sharing this story. I'm really impressed by you and your courage and listening intently. So I hope that other people will watch you listen to this, because on the one hand, it's heartbreaking, but it's also so very inspiring because of the journey you're on right now, and you're still in the thick of it. So thank you for sharing, these very intimate details about your journey. I do have a question, if I may ask, about, I hear detransitioners and parents of detransitioners who have fallen all along the spectrum. Some didn't proceed as far as you did. Some proceeded further. I'm curious what your take is on the people you talk about who supported you, that they try and surround you, and as Alvin Louis with Courage is a Habit says, you get love bombed. It's just all these dopamine hits of people who are surrounding you, and you feel loved and supported. How many of these people do you think genuinely believe they're helping people? In their heart of hearts, they think that this is the right thing to do, this is ethical, this is going to save lives, versus people who are in it perhaps just for the financial gain or the virtue signaling, conformity? Because I struggle with this. I don't know if you have an answer really, but what's your take?
I think there is a significant portion of people, even in the medical field, who they do truly believe they're helping some people with this, and they believe in it. It's almost, and to make this comparison, it almost really is like a religion where they have this belief in it. And and if you truly believe that you are helping someone, and to find out later that you are actually hurting someone, to accept that fact is a very heavy mental breakthrough to have. And it is one that I think the majority of people that support this are not ready or even capable in some cases of having.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Because if you have been doing something all along and you're like, yes, this is the good thing, this is right, I am helping people, and then you have to turn around and someone's like, no, you are harming people when you do this. Right. Having to come to that realization and even accept that you could have hurt another human being, even unintentionally, is one that is quite, like I said, it is a mental weight that is going to take a lot of processing to get to a point where you can even accept it, let alone do anything about it.
That's a very mature and graceful way of putting it. Thank you for sharing that perspective.
Luka, I know the last time I talked to you, you told me to go on Reddit detrans, and I have a couple times, and as a mom, it's very difficult.
I do believe anytime I tell people to scroll through the Reddit, I say, by the way, that is probably one of the most depressing places on the internet. So be warned.
Oh, wow.
If you look, I mean, so many. I think I saw 78,000 different chats, and that was just one. There were several subsets. A lot of kids, I'm confused. I don't know. I had this, should I get bottom surgery? I'm scared. I'm being told different things. My aunt, it's so heartbreaking. How many people come to you? How many kids and say privately, because they're afraid that maybe they don't have your strength. They're afraid to speak out. How many that we don't see? We see you, we see Chloe Cole, we see a few voices. We're so thankful, but how many do you represent? Because a lot of times trans activists will say, oh, that's just an outlier. Most of us are thrilled. We're thrilled. We are so happy that we did all the surgeries. What's the truth, Luka?
The truth of everything is that putting your face to a message like this is something that I personally was okay with, because I was someone who was like, you know what, if I'm going to say this, I believe in what I'm saying, so I'm going to put my face to that, and that is something I'm okay with. But having to come out publicly and admit something that you most likely thought for years was the right thing, and having to admit that you were wrong in that is quite a humbling experience, but it is also a very scary one with the state of how these activists act. Because, it's one thing to maybe quietly accept it and like keep it to yourself. But actually having to speak about it is an entirely another thing because of how vicious and vile some of these activists online are.
Yes.
They claim that there is a transphobe hiding around every corner. But I have never received so much hate and bile and threats as I have since I just talked about my experience, even, like not even before I started doing anything else, even when I was just sharing my story of what happened, they had issues with that. It really is an issue of, if you do not essentially toe the line and continue to fawn over them, you need to be struck down, which is very worrying because there needs to be a discourse here.
And it's a small group, right? It's a small group.
It is a small group of these very vocal activists that I worry do have quite the stranglehold on the narrative of the greater trans community. Because there are so many people that just want to live their life and be left alone and didn't ask for any of this. They want to keep kids out of it. They wanted to keep vulnerable people out of this. They just wanted to live their life.
Right. Like Sarah Higdon.
Like Sarah, there's so many people like that. And a lot of them, kind of if they get to a point where they can blend into society, they're just not going to talk about this because of how heated this is. I know, when I moved up to college, I just went with I was passing as a man, and I was just like, you know what? I'm just not going to acknowledge the trans thing because it is so much of a vitriolic topic where I could feel if I brought it up, people would walk on eggshells around me, and I hated it. And so I didn't. And that was me a few years ago. So I can't imagine if you're an adult with a career and a family on either side of this, that you really would want to come out and talk about it right now.
Yeah. Right.
So it's not really about love and inclusion. I mean, it's not about accepting people. So they're only accepting if you go along with their narrative, but if you don't, then they're not going to accept you for who you are and who you want to be, and, trying to embrace your true self. So it's just really unfortunate the way they've spun this. Even,
and this is, I guess, a good example, even when I still identified as trans, whenever it was one of those things where I would post something or talk about something, even questioning the narrative of where things were going, I'd be like, but biological sex does exist and it is important. And yes, I was still operating somewhat within their framework, but even then the slightest deviations were punished to the point where, by the end of where I was still identifying as trans before I detransitioned, I didn't want to interact with that community at all, because even then they were, very honestly closed-minded and unaccepting of any sort of nuanced discussion.
Right. When did you actually come to a point where you realized, oh no, what have I done?
So the first little blip of that would have been my freshman year of college in the spring. So around last year, so a little bit over a year ago now, when I stopped taking the antidepressant SSRIs I had been on for almost all my teenage years, because then I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm sick of taking a pill every day. I don't like this. I want to be able to manage whatever happens in my life. I will work hard and learn to manage it.
Were you on those pills? Were you on depression pills before, during, and after all the transitioning of things?
Yes.
And
when did you start taking SSRIs?
It would have been right when I turned 15.
So you're taking you're taking birth control pills,
Mhm.
and you're taking SSRIs. Are you only taking one SSRI or several?
It had been switched up several times throughout my teenage years. This different combinations. At one point, it was like, oh, anti-depression SSRI stuff, and then like, oh, you're still really anxious. Well, here's fucking Xanax, and we're gonna like make you sleepy during
Xanax
class.
is a teenager.
Yeah,
Xanax is a teenager.
for anxiety. For my freshman year of high school, and then I wonder why there's like moments where I'm like, I don't remember what I did that day.
Wow. I'm so
Xanax
sorry.
is a very powerful
Mhm.
drug that is not supposed to be long-term, first of all.
Mhm.
And it is not supposed to be for kids.
No.
I mean, right here, I'm not a doctor, but you know, my son's in medical school, my family's
Mhm.
dad's a surgeon, surrounded by the medical community, a lot of friends that are, and I can tell you, if I had some of my friends around here that are in the medical community, so many red flags as you're talking are going up. So many. It's like it's that so many different paths to try to understand why you were in the state that you were in.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have described it as I have the entire like comorbidity and life instance like tornado going around at this time. You know, because I had like
malpractice. I mean, this is medical malpractice.
And I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just thinking that was very interesting that you were on antidepressants going through this all. And so I want you to continue, of course. I just thought that was an interesting point that.
So from there, that was when the first little, like that spring when I stopped those, that was the first little blip of them where I was like, okay, but you know, I don't want to take this medication every day. But then I was like, okay, but I'm also doing this injection of testosterone each week. And from there, you know, end of the school year happened. At that point, I was doing it myself, yes. And, you know, at that point, end of the school year happened. I went off to my summer job and it kind of went on the back burner. And then it was really after, you know, after the summer was over and I was really kind of thinking about, well, what do I want for my life? At this point, I was really unhappy doing an injection each week. You know, I was getting to the point where I wasn't feeling like good anymore at all. I was feeling worse. My joint pain had started to get worse over the summer, even while I was on T. You know, I just wasn't feeling good. My brain was foggy at the end of it all the time. And I also got to the point where I was like, okay, well, what do I really want for my future? And at this point I was 20. And so I was like, this would have been this last fall. And I was like, okay, well, I think I do kind of want a family someday. I wasn't thinking like very specific into it, but that general concept of I think I do want a family someday. You know, I had the physical health consequences going on of like the joint pain and weird heart things going on, brain fog, all those things. And then I also got to the point where I was like, being attached constantly to this medical system of, you know, always needing to do an injection each week, always needing blood work done, always needing a pharmacy nearby to pick up this stuff. I was like, this is severely limiting my freedom. And I think all this kind of wound up into this perfect storm of I am not doing this anymore. I am going to stop this. I am going to try and have the future I want. And I'm going to essentially similarly to what I did with the antidepressants is I'm going to deal with any consequences in the like battleground of reality this time.
Wow.
And I'm going to get through them.
That's awesome.
So did you go through anybody to detransition or did you just stop doing certain things or?
Essentially what I did is I had like a syringe and you would fill it up like that much. And then I did normal dose next week, a little bit less, next week, a little bit less. And I just kind of kept going until I could stop. I knew at this point from looking at some of the other like detrans stories on Reddit or talking with other people, you know, in the Discord, I was like, I don't want to stop cold turkey because I know that can make things worse. Right. But I, at this point, was weaning off of it. I was talking to them and I was like, okay, I think I might be a point where I can stop. And then I went in to a doctor at my university's clinic, and I explained everything that's going on with her. I was very like candid about like, this is what is going on. This is what I need you to help me check, because I know that this is like my hormone levels and my blood levels are the things that are important to get lab work done on, to make sure that one, there's no damage in like my red blood cell count, but also that, you know, my levels are bouncing back and going back down on depending on which thing you're looking at. I went into her and I explained everything to her, and she looked at me and she said, I want to help you, but I don't really know what to do with you. There's no protocol for this.
Right.
That's the question I was going to ask. Is there as much support as you detransition compared to when you're transitioning? Do they offer any support?
There's very few medical professionals that even want to deal with detransitioners, let alone know how to. And not to mention the fact that everything, because there's no codes for it, you're essentially paying for everything yourself.
Yeah.
All of my blood work I've gotten done was out of pocket. Any essentially reconstruction, regardless of what that may look like, you want is not going to be covered by insurance. As a matter of fact, you have states like Oregon that will demand and enforce by law that it is covered one way, and demand that insurance must cover transition, and then explicitly exclude detransitioners from that, which I think honestly tells you everything you need to know. Because if it was really about healthcare, there would be no reason to exclude detransitioners.
Well, and this is also happening with vaccine injury patients right now. My friend Ryan Cunningham suffered a vaccine injury. He's on Twitter. He's worth looking into because he's dealing with some major health setbacks from that. And he's been sounding the alarm. And he's in the same situation where doctors will not help him. He has a thyroid that is out of whack. His hormones are out of whack. He's put on weight. And so he has had to put a lot of money out of pocket to work with a lot of holistic doctors. I don't know if you have found holistic doctors that are interested in, endocrine function and and it is out of pocket, but it's worth, crowdsourcing and trying to do some GoFundMe, or I don't know if you're doing that, but
I have not.
But he has. And we actually, Wake Illinois started a GoFundMe or a version of it. I'm not a fan of it.
Good idea, Scarlett.
I think we need to start something for you, Luka, because I think holistic, I would look into that.
Can I add to that? I would like to add to that because I've gone to a place called the Wellness Way, which I talk about a lot. I went because I was having hormonal issues and for years was dealing with problems in my own body. And so I got my hormone levels tested in a very sophisticated way. I found out I had way too much estrogen. And I was told by the doctors there that because I had too many, my hormones were out of balance, and because my liver was not doing a good job of getting rid of those excess hormones, it was becoming toxic to my system. So they had to bring me through a process of getting rid of the excess hormones and bringing things back into balance, but they did it in a holistic, natural way. And I got results because of it. So, I mean, I don't know how much, like, obviously, because you were on testosterone for a long time, and I don't know, what kind of damage has been done, but I hope and pray that there's something that they could do to help you detox in a way and get your hormones back in balance. So I feel like the best chance might be holistic.
Yeah, and that's I think what a lot of detransitioners have been looking into. Also, one, because there is like the inherent distrust or having lost faith in some of the medical industry. Because I know, like, I'm very glad that the doctor that I went to see was nice enough to like do my blood work and everything. I'm very grateful she did that. But at the same time, after everything I've been through, and I just explained to you everything I went through, it's also not reassuring for her to be like, oh, do you need a prescription for hormonal birth control still? Or, call me when I'm trying to get, sex specific healthcare here, for something that's gone horribly wrong. referring to me as like a person with a cervix. That's not reassuring that you're actually going to help me.
A person
That's just another sign that you
Yeah.
you're nice enough. Once again, like the path to hell is paved with good intentions. You're nice enough, but that just tells me that I do not feel comfortable with maybe seeing long term with these issues. And then that's more why you see more detransitioners heading towards like a more holistic or at least whole body approach to it, because we've been through enough that we want someone who, instead of micromanaging a specific issue when our entire body has been affected,
Right.
try and find someone who will actually help us.
Luka, are you familiar with Do No Harm?
Yes.
Okay. Are they trying and get some people on this to do some research or just some treatment options for detransitioners right now?
I would have to ask, but
They should really be building a network of
they have something going on.
Yeah, hopefully they can build, if they haven't yet, a network of physicians that all detransitioners can at least rely on, even if it is out of pocket. And then Do No Harm or some of these groups could help maybe fundraise to just help offset costs, because this is the future of medicine that nobody's really talking about because it's happening in real time. But
even get retired physicians, retired nurses to come out of retirement to help, even if they can give some advice. Find maybe some older doctors that, because I know that a lot of this can be caught, you're worried if I step out and do something, I'm going to get canceled. Well,
your license, right?
Doctor, and you still have your license and you can still write prescriptions. Maybe you can stand up and, kind of help these kids and these young adults like yourself. I was wondering one thing, what about relationships? What about personal relationships? How did all of this, were you able to have relationships? What about love? What about boyfriend, girlfriend, all the things that you kind of live that make you feel so happy as a teenager, make you feel like you want to die, did you experience that?
When I was in high school, I had I don't even consider them relationships, because it was just we hung out as friends with their friends. But they were also all within the bubble of the trans queer high school community in my town, where, it didn't really feel it never felt like an actual relationship. And I will say one of the things that actually did kind of make me start thinking about my future was this possibility of someone I was really close to that I had worked with over the summer, thinking about could we have a relationship? And that did kind of get me thinking, what do I want for my future? What do I actually want this to look like? Actually considering some of these big things that I never really had to think about before, because of the fact that, I was a teenager who had never had a real relationship before. And I mean, in terms of now, I'm in a relationship with someone who I love, and he loves me very much, and is very accepting and knows everything I've gone through, and has actually known me for the past couple of years now. But we really got close when I actually opened up about the whole detransition thing and everything I was going through. So there is that little bit of I guess a happy ending to everything that has been going on.
That's really nice to hear. That's good to hear. I have a question, and as you know, the tragedy that happened in Tennessee and Nashville, what's your perspective about that? As someone who you've detransitioned, we know that the person that entered the school and, in whether it was because of a mental health crisis, whatever happened, that shooting occurred. How do you look at that? Because you have a really unique perspective.
I mean, I think my perspective is, similar to everyone, where it's we all accept that what happened was terrible. My main takeaway from everything was all of a sudden watching all these people almost defend the shooter, or defend essentially their narrative legacy of how they wanted to be talked about, focusing on the pronouns, or, essentially policing how this horrible person was talked about. so that way, God forbid you offend someone who, one, is dead, and two, just shot up a school.
Right.
But it was very concerning to see that shift and to see it on a broader, I guess, scale than I had seen before. Because you would see it occasionally with a few, more unhinged activists online whenever you would have like a rapist getting moved into a woman's prison and then demanding that you refer to this biological male as she, her still, even though that person raped someone. But then you see it when this was like the largest scale I have ever seen of people immediately jumping on we cannot misgender this person, to the point where you had mainstream press essentially towing that line, which should be terrifying. That mainstream outlets are posting things like misgendering the shooter dishonors the legacies, the memories of their victims. When you have them focusing on every other aspect, which they would not do, and then for any other case of this, and then all of a sudden it almost disappears from the narrative.
Right.
I saw a video of people in the Tennessee Capitol holding up 7 fingers for 7 victims, counting the shooter among them. It's a terrifying precedent that really reveals, I think, just how, I don't want to say divisive, but how radicalized some people have been. That when you hear about children being murdered, your first thought was, God forbid someone used the wrong word to describe the person who did that act.
Were you along those lines? Like, so when you were going through high school and, did you sense any of that? Or, or has that just gotten worse in the past couple of years? Or did you feel like there was kind of a radicalization effort?
I feel like I noticed some of it in high school, where it was like, okay, we all kind of know that like 1 or 2 people in the local community who are a little bit, probably spending too much time online. It was never violent. That was the thing. It was never violent. But it was very much going down this path of like, you cannot say this wrong thing.
Right. Exactly.
Or all hell will break loose. And I noticed, and then all of a sudden, you got to like 2020, 2021, when everyone is locked in their home, terminally online, not interacting with other human beings in a healthy, social way that we need as, as humans. And I feel like since then you've just seen like the amount of unhinged radical takes skyrocket.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Totally agree. Yeah. Across all fronts.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's
more than one. Wow.
And how do you feel as a woman? Because, I've been really happy lately watching Megyn Kelly, because I feel like she's just becoming a real voice for women, like saying we have to speak up for women. We can't be afraid. Let them call us what you will. Call us all the names in the book. But there are 2 sexes, male and female. And as women, if we don't stand up for ourselves, we're going to be erased. Mm-hmm. How do you feel now? Like, are you really embracing your womanhood? Do you feel like you're fighting for women and girls now more than ever?
Yeah, I think one actual thing that I guess posting publicly about my detransition has given me is I have met so many, amazing women across essentially every like political spectrum, every religious spectrum, of just how many different ways there are to be a woman, with all the common things there being, that they are female, that they are women, and that they all want the best for women and girls, even if they maybe have different ideas about which road that takes. And it's one of those things where I'm definitely embracing, being a woman, and also just embracing, I guess in some ways also still being a bit of a tomboy, and like what that means to me in terms of, I do wish I would have, maybe if I had met some of these people earlier in my life, that have helped, or, would have at least given me a different role model that wasn't Yeah, essentially the gender ideology that was getting fed to me online at the time, where it was like, okay, well, if you like X, then it means you're a boy, or if you like Y, it means you're a girl. Where it's such.
It's very
It's
stereotypical.
yeah.
They're stereotyping what a boy and a girl is. I mean, for like based on what people like. And I remember being a tomboy growing up. I remember I didn't like wearing dresses. I wanted my hair short. I remember I was very into sports. I liked getting dirty, and I pretended I was Indiana Jones. I mean, I remember doing that kind of stuff as a little kid.
Yeah.
And I remember even kind of wishing, like thinking, I think I look more like a boy. I mean, at the time, that's how I felt. And I'm just so glad that I didn't have people around me trying to convince me that I was born in the wrong body. I was, doing certain things that were boy things or whatever. So, and eventually I did eventually become a little more feminine, but I still kind of, I have a little bit of that tomboyish, style in me. So, it's very stereotypical.
Yeah.
Strangely, it's kind of
it is reverting back to almost the most rigid adherence to like 1950s stereotypical gender stereotypes of, if you have a son who picks up a Barbie and likes to maybe wear his sister's tutu, all of a sudden,
oh my gosh,
go to the gender clinic, something is wrong, or and that's, I feel like it's especially that, where you use, or at least with the videos I see online of like moms or dads who their son was effeminate in some way and they took him to the gender clinic and told them they're a girl now. You do see it the other way around with the really, really young kids.
Well, what about, and I think that a lot of people in the gay lesbian community, I mean, that they should be outraged, because I think that kids that would grow up to be same-sex attracted, had you just let them go through puberty, instead are being tagged as transgender. Maybe they start as non-binary. And when you're a little kid and you find that you are not stereotypical, maybe in some ways, and then to have the first thought be, well, you're probably in the wrong body. I mean, I think a lot of people that are in the gay lesbian community would tell you that when they were younger, sometimes they felt like they were in the wrong body, or they felt like they didn't fit in. And so I know that there's this, I've heard a lot of, I have a friend who's gay that has said they're trying to trans the gay away. I think that there might be some truth to that.
Yeah. I mean, when you look into the data of like, we know, like, long term, the vast majority of children who suffer gender dysphoria, they will grow out of it through puberty, and a very decent chunk of them will grow up to be gay or lesbian. And you also listen to like the older generation of gays and lesbians speak about their childhood and how it sounds identical to these kids that are now being dragged to the gender clinic. Yeah. And you do have so many more gay and lesbians and bisexuals speaking up now, being like, what are you doing? Yeah. What are you doing? Because a lot of them especially fought so that way you wouldn't have to be put in a stereotypical box of like, only girls can like Barbies and only boys can go outside and play in the mud. Like I remember like briefly, almost, it felt like I made like a pit stop in like that section of the LGBT community online, where it was like, gender roles don't need to be heavily enforced on children, let kids grow up. And then it almost, like with the rest of the movement, it almost got like plowed out of the way to know, if you like Barbies, you're a girl. If you're a little kid, I don't know what happened, and it makes me happy though that you see more and more gays and lesbians fighting and getting more and more vocal against this specific issue, fighting for that.
Yeah, there is. Don't you think, though, there is kind of a gap in the influencer market, if you will, if I can call it that? So Megyn Kelly, she's a, what I would call, I think, more of a stereotypical female. I mean, she was on Fox News. She looked very glam. She still has a very glam look. She's a beautiful lady, but she doesn't have like the tomboy vibe. She's married to a man. She has kids. She's a mom. She's probably a little bit more stereotypical, and then you have the other side where you have the gay community, and they're talking about, their experiences coming of age and puberty. But where's that middle market of influencers? I mean, is it athletes? Is it, the people who are sporty, the people who are, because unfortunately a lot of these people who are famous, they've gone so woke and they've drank the Kool-Aid and they're towing that line. Like, where's the middle ground? We need more influencers, don't you think, Luka, that are kind of like more just relatable, and they're saying, hey, just let kids be kids. I was a tomboy, and now who cares even what their sexuality is? I know that's everybody's journey, but it's kind of like, I don't fit the stereotypical mold, and where are those voices? There seems to be.
I think you're gonna see. I would hope at least you would see that gap being almost filled by like more and more essentially average people who are speaking up and maybe putting out some kind of content or just their voice online because they feel that there is that gap in the market, and in like the market of social influence at least. And I mean, you do see it because it does feel very polarized. And then you realize that there are more and more like average people from, all walks of life who kind of bridge that middle ground, who are beginning to speak up more and more. And my hope is that continues.
Yeah, you're right. I have hope. The grassroots, don't you think, Scarlett and Stephanie? That's kind of where grassroots is, I guess, filling the void. Although I don't know. I'll never be fashionable, but it's like you've got Kim Kardashian and like her boot cheeks hanging out all the time. And then it's like, you have like a gay lesbian soccer player. Like we need some like middle ground somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I talk to regular people. And so what happened, I don't know if you've heard, Luka, our incident in Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, which is one of the first incidents.
I know which one you're talking about. Yes.
Yeah, where the 14-year-old girls are cleaning off after their shower. They're showering after a swim unit, and a biological male that says, "I'm trans, by the way," disrobes and showers right next to the girls, exposing his penis to them. And they're just a huge uproar because it was a non-policy that the district had. It was so open-ended that basically whatever the kid is identifying that day, they can go into any restroom, any shower room, any private space of a girl, and vice versa. I guess a girl could go into a boy's private space. And one
has happened, by the way.
Yep. And one mom spoke out, and she said, first of all, my daughter is a lesbian, so don't you dare call me like a bigot or a homophobe. But she said, my daughter plays football, and she's in high school, and for the last 4 years, she has had to change in janitor's closets, in porta potties, in whatever space they can find for her. They would never tell all the boys to leave the locker room for her. Yet, for the boy, they've told the girls, deal with it. If you don't like it, we'll find a janitor's closet for you. So all the girls have to be inconvenienced because there's one trans identifying boy who has has full intact genitalia, is choosing to shower with them and use their space. So this is causing just a big uproar. There's a lot of confusion, and there's potential lawsuits. The districts, the schools, they don't know what to do. Did you ever face anything like that when you were in high school? Is this new?
So, funnily enough, when I was in high school, so by my senior year of high school, I had been on hormones for a little bit and also had surgery. And so when I went to the guidance counselor to ask, like, okay, I need a gym credit. What are we going to do about this? Because there's no real place for me to have a locker that isn't one of the two locker rooms. And they had me use the boys' locker room, which thank God everything went fine. We never showered in there. No one actually got all the way undressed. It was just like putting on shorts and, a t-shirt to go out back to the gym. And like, thank God everything went fine. But like looking back, I just can't imagine why an adult felt that was a safe, viable option.
Right.
For me to be doing.
Well, I don't think it was fair to you. Like, I don't think it was fair to you either.
I feel awful for like, I don't think anyone in there cared, because typically it doesn't go the other way around in terms of like typically. And also, like I said, we probably spent like maybe 5 minutes in there a day tops, just quickly changing and literally running out of the locker room to go to class. But at the same time, you know, I just think like we couldn't have figured anything out. Looking back, we could not have figured anything else out that would have been remarkably safer for me.
Yes.
Right.
Than putting me in the boys' locker room. Because like I know at that point in my transition, it would not have been comfortable for anyone involved if I went to the girls. But at the same time, there had to be some other option that could have been worked out. And that, I guess, looking back, that is the thing that I don't understand with some of these activists that demand access to these spaces, is it would be safer and more comfortable for everyone involved if there was just a separate neutral space. And by neutral, I mean like the stereotypical, like almost like a family bathroom where it's just like one room with like, that would be like the winning solution, because that way, you know, there's no one in either of the sex locker rooms having their privacy invaded, and that way someone still has a safe place to change where they are not going into these other places where they always claim that they may be like injured or stuff.
Less liability. Yeah.
And for some reason that answer is not acceptable.
No, it's not. They don't want that. They think that that is separate but equal. They want whatever you identify, you go into that room. And when the obvious answer is some sort of neutral space, that's what the kids want. That's what the parents want. I think that's even what a lot of the teachers want, but and then
there's a small group trying to equate it to like civil rights.
Yeah,
like you can't have
bathrooms
separate, you know, it's like, oh, it's like a black person having to drink from a water fountain that's a separate water fountain. It's like, well, no, you shouldn't be equating the two things. I mean, they're just, everything now is just being equated with like, I feel like they're trying to compare it to race or even just gender, you know, being, you know, equal pay or equal whatever, but like transgender is being grouped into all of that.
Yes. So that's what they're doing with Title IX. With Title IX, they're changing the definition of sex to include gender identity. And so, but by doing so, they're taking a provision that was instituted to provide women, basically to prevent sex discrimination and to provide them equal opportunity. They are using that to actually enforce sex discrimination and to be sure that they don't have equal opportunities. It's exactly opposite. They're taking Title IX and turning it on its head, and it's now being weaponized against women and girls. So how do you feel about that, about women, you know, biological men competing in women's sports? I mean, we really aren't seeing the other side. You're not seeing biological women trying to enter men's sports right now. What do you think about that?
The closest thing I've actually seen to it being the other way around was, I know this was a while ago, there was a case of someone who had transitioned from female to male and was taking testosterone, not being allowed to compete on the men's team, and therefore wrestling against other biological females who weren't on testosterone, which at that point it equates to you're doping. It's weird it wasn't treated. It's weird it wasn't treated like that in that case because of the identity. But in terms of the other way around, I think it is, you know, it's essentially dismantling the very reason that Title IX was put in place in the first place, to like provide that equal opportunity, by now making it where, you know, a biological male can just say, well, I'm female now and I'm going to go compete on the women's team. When we know that that's just not fair to the women.
And like Riley Gaines, she's become sort of the figurehead for this movement. And she said she had to be in the locker room with Leah Thomas, and she felt violated. She felt betrayed. And when Leah Thomas and a biological woman tied, they gave the trophy to the biological male. They wanted the picture because that optics was better. And, you know, these are the stories that they make me angry. Quite honestly, I'm angry. This has to end. This just, we can't go on pretending that biology doesn't exist. just as much, I think it's harmful, and it's particularly harmful because the effects that it's having on people like you, Luka, and now it's happening younger and younger. This delusion, this fantasy that we are told we must affirm this fantasy. We must say the language. It's causing real harm.
Mm-hmm.
And what are the answers? And you're very young, but you're very bright. What do you see? You're the future. What do you see as the answer?
I mean, for part of it, it really is going to have to be more average people not being afraid to speak out on this. Because I do think the majority of like your average person in this country, if you went up to them and essentially told them, hey, they're performing sex changes on, like 13-year-olds, young teenagers, they'd be like, what is going on? This needs to be stopped.
Yeah. Right.
But essentially we have this like class of people who just want to be kind. They just want to be nice, and we have be nice ourselves to the point where we are debating if biology is a reality.
Right.
So I think there is going to have to be some, even if it makes, the Twitter people upset, you're going to have to say it, and you're just going to have to deal with, they're going to be mad no matter what you say. So you might as well say what's based in reality.
Courage is contagious. I think you tweeted that.
I was just going to say that, actually.
Yeah. And I'm so grateful for this courageous conversation. I have to cut out, though, you guys, but I got to get my kiddos to sleep. But Luka, it was lovely to connect with you. You're a beautiful person, and I'm just so grateful to hear your story. I think you should crowdsource, and perhaps as we pool networks and build more coalitions, we'll see more detransitioners get some support. But thank you for inviting me on, and this was a great conversation. Onward.
And Luka, you have to come to some of our events. We need to invite Luka to our event in June.
Yeah. So Awake Americans really launched from the advocacy we've been doing. I've known Scarlett now for a while, is a grassroots activist in our respective states. So what we've noticed, I think, in this cycle, and perhaps you've seen it too through your journey, Luka, is we need to get back to basics. Like, we can't assume everyone's been down our rabbit hole and has been red pilled. Like, sometimes, when I hear people say, like, what is woke? Like, what is puberty block? What are puberty blockers? I'm like, wow, they really do not know all that we know. So we're going to try and get back to the basics of starting at square one, because not everybody's seen the movie, right? They haven't even seen the preview for it, and we've seen the whole movie and the rolling credits. So we need to just get back to those basics. So hopefully I'll connect with you all again here soon. Thank you. You guys have a good night.
Bye, Shannon. Yeah, it's getting late, but I just love talking to you, Luka. I have so many, it's like I could ask. I have so many questions all the time. But so, I agree with you. I think it's really average people that have to stand up. That's what it is. I'm talking all the time. Yelling from the rooftops, trying to bring awareness. And James Lindsay had a really good tweet, I think it was a couple days ago, where he said, I know it's hard, but right now we're still in the process of bringing awareness. We're farther along than most people. Everything that you've shared, Luka, this would be a complete surprise to so many people. They most of the time think I'm crazy. They think Stephanie's crazy. They think Shannon's crazy. They don't think any of this is happening. In Moms for Liberty, that's something we face all the time. When we point out the pornographic books that are on the shelves of elementary schools, that can't be right until they see them themselves.
I actually saw something earlier that is like a great comparison for this. It was someone compared it to, essentially there is a page in the book Matilda where you have one of the students describing what the principal did, where the principal picked her up by her pigtails, swung around and threw her over the fence. And they're discussing well, why haven't any of the parents spoken up about this? And they go through essentially well, if a kid goes home and tells their parents that, they're going to go no way that happened.
Yeah.
Then they know it happened. And it is, I read that earlier today. I'm like, that is essentially what is happening here, where it sounds absolutely too outrageous to be the truth. until you like present it and people realize it is. And then that is an entire like almost new awakening of, oh my God, things really are this bad.
And if think about it, if 2016, can you imagine being a teenager right now in schools?
After everything, here's the thing. I graduated right. I was part of the COVID class. I graduated high school in 2020.
Wow.
And so my last like quarter of school was online. It wasn't really anything because they were still figuring that out. But so I got by with very little of essentially the worst of this like terminally online isolating while trying to be in high school kind of thing. Like the worst I lost was like, oh, I didn't have senior prom or graduation, which to me, I'm over it. But then you realize that there are kids that have done like a year or more of this. They're lacking social skills already from that.
Mm-hmm.
They're already behind in that. And then you have these kids that are lacking maybe proper social skills on how to correctly, interact with humans in a way of maybe nuanced discussion or just general, like how you should civilly get along with someone you may not agree with. And then you have them being pulled down these online rabbit holes and essentially radicalized into these insane ideas that do not exist in reality.
Right.
And you have like the perfect storm for this chaotic movement that is essentially taking over parts of these young people's lives.
And it's not all the schools or the teachers, because I've talked to plenty of teachers that they're like, we are so confused. The kids sometimes, and I'll take that hey, Scarlett, sometimes I think you have it wrong. The kids are coming in with these ideas already. We're trying to figure out what to do. When you talk to good teachers that have been doing this for a long time, they don't even know what to do. And on the inverse, there are school districts like Sun Prairie that start this indoctrination at 3K. They are the books, everything. I've read the books. I see the curriculum. I've read the curriculum. It is downright indoctrination that they are implanting these ideas in the minds of the kids, where kids would not be thinking about this. But so I think that there's many different things going on. There's the culture, politics.
It's the culture too. I was going to say it's in cartoons nowadays. It's in it's on cereal boxes or whatever. It's they're pushing this everywhere in corporations, and then to a certain extent, sometimes there's backlash, of course, like with Disney or whatever. So there are people that are pushing back, and there's some of that going on. But I think it's just been permeating society for how several years, has really ramped up the past few years. So and then of course some parents do push this on their kids, where you can tell that the kids themselves are being, the parents themselves are affecting their kids by how they're being raised. It's a combination.
I've heard that called Transhausen by proxy.
Okay.
Like Munchausen by proxy, but instead with this. That is like essentially like the videos I brought up earlier, where you see these parents that they're like, oh, my kid told me they were trans at 2 years old, and the kid is now 5.
What are you today?
Yeah, and it's one of those things where like having a transgender like 4-year-old is the equivalent of having a vegan cat. We know who's making the decisions.
Right.
Exactly. And it's not the cat in that situation.
Right.
So I know that at least now, it was 14 states, but Oklahoma is a new one that's restricting they call it gender affirming care. And you spoke in Nebraska. What happened but this, we'll end it with this, but what did you say? How did that go? And what was the result?
Anytime I have spoken in these places, it has just been me essentially sharing my story, going through, what happened to me, how old I was when this happened, how it's basically like a TLDR of, because I normally only have a couple minutes to talk. It is that of my mental state beforehand, what happened to me, what happened with my parents, me being like, I could not consent to this, my health issues now, and then I normally wrap it up with the adults in the room, it is time for you to stand up because those who took an oath to do no harm have failed, or something along those lines.
Yes.
And, you know, in Nebraska is interesting because I don't think people realize that we do have like big med centers there that have a little bit of sway. And we apparently also have a few more insane politicians than I realized.
You're talking about in Nebraska?
Yes.
Okay.
That's where I'm
That
from.
surprises me.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a few who did their media circuit, and you could tell we're just loving getting their ego boosted for this, despite the fact that they were presented with so much evidence to the contrary, because they were dug into this belief like the most like revivalist, passionate religious person I have ever seen.
Wow.
You know, I've seen that. It got to the point where one of them actually said these surgeries are she said these surgeries, we know they're never happening anyway in Nebraska. And I got the clip of that, and I just posted a picture of me with this part of my shirt up so you could see the end of the mastectomy scars. And I just told her, come say it to my face. I want you to look me in my eyes and tell me this didn't happen.
Wow.
So there's been that. Nebraska is interesting because we have a unicameral. It's not the two houses. It's just one chamber.
Oh.
Which makes things a little bit more interesting. I know things are still being worked on. I don't know what's getting passed there right now, but really anywhere I've talked, it's just been my story and a call for the adults, you know, the average people who see what is going on, to stand up and honestly at this point be on the side of what science has told us.
Right. Reason, science, biology. Also not just like, part of it is like, you know, biological facts, and part of it is people like you who can say, this is my experience, and this is, you know, the damage done.
Yeah.
These are the consequences.
I hope that you will come and testify in Wisconsin, because I believe that we will have a similar bill where we will attempt to, you know, ban puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and surgeries for minors if they're trying to change, in the attempt to change their biological sex. Because I know you have used very harsh terms, Luka. Feel free to use those terms. I listened to your testimony. It is
powerful.
It's monstrous. We children can't consent to puberty blockers. They can't consent. They're not able to consent to Lupron, a drug that was used to chemically castrate sex offenders.
I mean, if a child cannot, it also opens a scary door of like, okay, a child cannot consent to sex, but they can consent to castration. That is not the path I think we as a society want to go down, opening up what permanent adult decisions kids can consent to. That is not the road I want to go down. I also wanted to say that I will say some of the trans activists really kind of, I guess made their own bed here with always bringing up the lived experience as, you know, an important facet of things. Because not only now I will flat out call them like science deniers, because, you know, what we have is not on their side, data wise, but also, you know, you made your own bed by being like lived experience is key, and you can't pull that back now that detransitioners are coming out of the woodworks. You know, we are, when I share my lived experience, when any of us share our lived experience, we are playing by the rules of the game you set up for how much we should be listened to.
Right.
And if they want to walk that back, they can. But I don't think they're going to.
No. They have got to listen. There are detransitioners. There are those who have their lived experience, and you're dealing with things you're going to have to deal with your whole life. And God willing, I think that there's going to be, you're going to find help with holistic medicine going to find more doctors. This is something that's not going away. So I think there's going to be more professionals that are going to help detransitioners. And, and right now, I know you've said you're not sure that you can have children, but there's good news there. I have seen stories of several detransitioners who have had children, who've been able to have their own children. Maybe it might take a little extra work, but I think the way you're very young and the way medicine is moving, I have high hopes and confidence that is something you'll be able to do. But to take this away from a child who doesn't know better, it's morally wrong. And you said it, and you're right. You are depriving these kids of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we need to ban this, and we need to ban this in Wisconsin. And I hope that you will come to Wisconsin and testify when we are able to get the bill to the floor and implore our Democratic Governor Evers to protect children, put them first, and not put big pharma first. Let's put children first, and let's do what's right by kids.
Yeah,
so
I think
your final thoughts. What are your final thoughts?
I suppose on one of those notes is I really wish, because there are a lot of your average Democrats who are against what is happening to kids. They don't want this to be happening to kids. Yeah. And I think it is a shame that so many of their politicians are not realizing that and are instead pandering to the medical industry and a few unhinged activist organizations. But above all, I am hopeful that things will move in the right direction, whether that be in my personal life or with all this as a whole. Because I think at this point there's no detransitioners. We're here. We're not going to stop talking.
Good.
You can't make us crawl back to wherever so that you can continue this narrative, because this is our lives now. Yeah. I'm going to make the best of my life regardless of what I've been through. But that also, me trying to make the best of things, is not a reason to stop talking about this when it can help other people.
Good.
Well, you have a really powerful voice. I mean, and it helps if other people come alongside you. And I saw that panel of people who had detransitioned, and it's such an important thing to have that community of support for people that know exactly what you're going through or something very similar. And so actually I am hopeful that this will become more of a conversation, and it has to start somewhere. So I think it's, first of all, very courageous of you to come out and be willing to share your story, especially since you said at the moment, at least, there hasn't been the people you thought were supportive of you after you started detransitioning, they were not, you couldn't find them. So I think, the more this can get out there, encourage is contagious, and getting your message out there, and people that have actually experienced this can be a powerful thing. So I'm just really excited that you were, able and willing to come on the podcast.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you for coming on. And I'm going to say that these sex change drugs and these sex change surgeries for minors, they're going to be banned and outlawed one day, because the truth, it's inevitable. I mean, it's sort of like that line from The Matrix. Do you hear that? Do you hear that sound of inevitability? This is so horrific. There's going to be so much harm done. And with so few scant, poorly done studies to support it, that eventually everyone's going to say the emperor has no clothes. This isn't the truth. We've been told a lie. It's just, the sooner we can do that, the less children that are irreversibly harmed, children who will be sterilized, children who will be they'll have lifelong pain, and who may end up actually at a point where there's suicidal ideation, because they have done everything. They have done everything. They've had their breasts removed. They've gone through maybe bottom surgery. They've had their uterus removed. They've done everything, and they still can't fill the hole. The hole that brought them to that place is still there. And at that point, when they've hit rock bottom, who will be there? Certainly not these doctors.
It will not be the activists. It will not be, in a way, it won't be these parents that you see rallying around these kids' trans identities. They're not going to be the one to pick these people back up when they've fallen. Once they've gotten their virtue.
Like Luka, it'll be people like us. We have to be the ones. We have to be there. Because there's more to this than being opposed to something. I feel more and more that we have to be there for the victims when they come out of the fog.
Yeah, when you
support them.
It's similar to a concept even when you're dealing with kids and even parenting, is when you take something away, you need to replace it with something else.
Yeah.
And something that will be helpful, like ideally something that will be helpful and beneficial and loving. And I feel like as a broader concept, that can also be applied here. You have people who have so fervently hold on to this belief that this is what it is. And that they need this experimental medicine, even if evidence doesn't support that. And, when the science catches up and that is pulled back, you need to replace that with something. And I'm just going to tell you, the trans community is not going to replace that with something beneficial from what I've seen. It's just not going to be that way. And it really, that's another thing where it is up to, normal people to help fill that void that is going to open up.
And I would say Christians, because I'm a Christian, I would say Christians.
I was just going to say that.
I just watched the movie Jesus Revolution with my daughters. And I was crying. I was crying while watching it because there's a point where the hippies they've said, these kids in the 70s, they were turning to drugs. They were turning to all the wrong things, sex, drugs, rock and roll,
looking for love in all the wrong places.
Looking for something to fill the hole. And there's a point where the main character says they're looking for God. And who's going to be there to introduce them to a loving God that loves them no matter what, that loves them exactly for who they are. And so I think that's why, on another angle, I implore that Christians get more involved in this, not to judge, but to love, to care, to show concern, and to stand for truth. Be a light.
That is love. Love is telling someone the truth and doing it in love. I mean, I'm not going to lie to someone to temporarily make them feel better. Trying to convince them of something that I know not to be true. And I think, for me, I grew up being very insecure about a lot of things. Now, I didn't have specifically gender identity issues, but I was trying to figure out who I was, what was my purpose. And so when I finally just realized how much God loved me and he created me the way I was for a purpose, that just totally made me whole in a way that nothing else I was trying to fill could, nothing else was able to fill that hole. And so, that is, I think sometimes we're all just seeking for our identity, and the transgender identity is just one identity that people are trying to figure out who they are, and so this is kind of like the latest type of identity that people are trying to search when they're searching for who they are.
I have made a joke before that if I had been born 10 years earlier, I probably would have just been a goth kid. Because it really is just one of those things where it is almost preying on this very vulnerable time when you have young people who are going to be searching for their different identities and who they are. And, it's not always going to be correct who they are because they're teenagers. I don't really see many 30-year-olds, dressing in all black with bad eyeliner still, demanding people call them Raven Darkness, the Lord of the Night. You don't see that because they were a teenager. But
there's the grunge, there's the grunge, or like Elvis Presley. that was considered like, oh my gosh, look at how, kids, especially teens, they're drawn. They're rebelling against everything. It's just a natural thing. Puberty, all of that, all those all the feelings, like just trying to find your place in the world. And then I think what's brand new is social media. And then for girls in particular, all the images of the perfect girls that have been airbrushed. And I mean, these influencers, I mean, they've probably had how many plastic surgeries, and they're young, and there's so many different filters, and they look so perfect. And then girls are looking and thinking, oh, because I know as a mom, I see some of that stuff, and you're like, oh, she looks really good.
I know even me, who at this point in my life, I'm well aware of everything that's going on, like with the social media and how it's bad for you, and how I know this isn't reality. And even me, sometimes I get where it's like, oh wow. And so I can't imagine what that is doing to like a 13-year-old who has just started puberty, is feeling all of the, like discomfort and angst and, stuff that looking back, we can laugh about it being like that time when they're trying to find, but like in that moment, it feels dead serious to them.
Right.
I'm just thinking about that. I'm like, this can't be good for them.
And there used to be parties, and you just never knew about them. So if you weren't invited, you didn't know. But now you know, because they're all taking a picture. I can't, with my girls, how many times they are crying. Somebody took a picture at a party and they clearly aren't there. And it's so someone posted on social media, the fear of missing out, FOMO. And then if there's some imperfection, that they'll get attacked by people they don't even know. It's just, so we're navigating different waters. And I think the number one advice I have for parents is, don't get phones. Wait till as long as you can. And when you do, that's your property. You've got to monitor the phone. It's so hard because everything is, I know everything's online. Your kids are like, I'm doing my homework. They're going between screens.
I hate that, for university, so much of my stuff is online to the point where it requires me to have my phone and my laptop by me, because to log into something, I need to get a passcode on my phone, all that kind of stuff. And it's I've talked with people around me before. I've been like, if I didn't have to have any technology to be like a productive member of society, I would be in a cabin in the woods by myself with nothing else right now, just to get away from it. But I think another important thing about like when your teenager does get a phone and you are monitoring them, also make sure that them getting access to the internet isn't gonna, break apart maybe like family time or that connection, and making sure that like there is an open line of communication, that even if you're monitoring something, there could be something you miss, and just making sure you have that close, open connection. So that way they hopefully don't get sucked into their phone as much, because they know they have this like bright, loving world that is beyond the phone.
And don't be afraid to talk to your kids about this stuff. Talk to them about it first. Know that, listen, no matter what school district you're in, if you're in a public school, and in most private schools, not all, we have my youngest in a good one, but they're going to hear this, or they're going to hear from their friends. So be the first one. Don't try and shield them from everything. Preemptively talk to them. Like, honey, I know like this is going to be confusing, but start having the conversations. People are going to tell you these things about gender and biological sex, and it's just not true. So I'm going to give you the facts. I'm going to arm you with the facts and truth. And listen, we don't want to have these conversations as young, but I've had to start having them with my 11-year-old in a small way, just to reinforce our values. And now when she sees something, she'll say, oh, mom, you change the channel. I can't watch that. And she knows, and it's great. So I think arm yourself, arm your kids in an age appropriate way. Make sure that you're talking to them first.
I think also that is just honestly a means of, in a way, setting them up for success too, about how you're going to deal with not only those around you, but maybe even your own feelings as like they're going through puberty and like these changing times. And it really does put up almost a defense against what are pretty normal, like teenage uncomfortable feelings. It puts up that defense so that way those things can't be twisted into these rabbit holes.
Yeah.
Right. Like, this is normal to be a little unsure, and these are awkward. I mean, teenage years can be awkward, and you know, you're changing, your body's changing, your emotions and hormones are going, you know, kind of haywire a little bit. So it's just because you're feeling that way doesn't mean that automatically. I mean, you know, it's being pushed automatically, like you said earlier, to it's just transgender. So.
Yeah. And we talked a lot about girls, but with your boys, I have an oldest son, and I think boys are they're out of the equation entirely in school. Like I think it's tragic, the fact that I think that we're just completely ignoring boys in some way. Like I know that this boy went into the shower room and stuff, but for the most part, boys, they're all just they're the worst, especially a white male. Like, that's enemy number one or something. And so I think it's doing a disservice to our boys. And that's where moms and dads have to be sure that they are raising quality young men, and they're teaching them how to be respectful and honorable and sure of themselves. It's you know, it's not easy. Yeah. It's not easy these days.
I think, like I said earlier, even about having that like open, loving communication, that applies to the child regardless of gender. Like, you know, setting a kid up for success when it comes to really arming them against what they're going to experience on social media or from peer groups. That's important regardless of whether you have a boy or a girl, because they both need to be able to deal with these situations, even if they deal with them differently. Like, having that base knowledge of, you know, if I say this, I know it's the truth, and I know my family knows it's the truth, and they're going to be there to support me, will help with more kids speaking up if they know that they are not going to get abandoned for speaking the truth. Because sometimes, especially, you know, with high school cliques and like younger generation, if you say something that maybe is unpopular, it can feel like the end of the world when, you know, maybe your group leaves you. Yeah. And having that support system where they can feel confident knowing that they are standing up for what is right and they are standing in reality is really how you get the next like generation to begin speaking up. And you do see that more and more. I've seen more and more videos of high school students speaking up against these things.
That's really awesome. Good to hear.
And it's really like inspiring to be like, okay, you know what? I think some of the kids are all right. It'll be okay.
That's what I'm told. That's what my kids tell me. My kids are always like, Mom, it's you know, we like. I also think that this group of kids, I know my kids are the most tolerant. They are so tolerant. They are so open-minded. They don't care about race. They don't care about what your sexuality is. They don't care how you identify. I think that it's a really good group of kids that are truly just truly tolerant and open-minded. And I think that's why it's a shame that their innocence and their goodness is being taken advantage of. And it's being like, if you're a good person, you won't say anything if that boy enters into your shower, or if that girl enters and you can't say you're uncomfortable. Like, that's not.
It's weaponized kindness.
Yes.
Yes. That's a good way to put it.
You have the right to feel like that you want a private space. You have the right to feel. It doesn't mean you hate. It just means that you have your own personal dignity. You have value, and your and your rights matter too, not just one certain, group that's sort of the new preferential group. I mean, it was CRT 2 years ago, and now it's this. They're always finding
There's always
some
a group that
issue.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been we're getting on over 2 hours, so
Oops.
I know we could talk.
It was a good conversation. At some point, it's hard to stop because it's just been a very interesting conversation. So I've enjoyed it a lot.
Luka, I'm so glad you could join us. I'm really happy to hear that you're in a relationship, that you have a boyfriend, you're happy. I know you're still dealing with the health issues. Are you back in school now?
I will be returning to school this fall semester.
Okay, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. And I look forward to meeting you in person again, because you'll be coming to Wisconsin and testifying, because like I said, this is and we're going to hope it gets signed, but even if it doesn't, it's the debate worth having.
The message is, it has
It's
to get
the
out
start of a conversation either way, and eventually, things will get done.
Yes, because we have to do this. We have to take that stand in our state. And there's 17 states, I believe, that have banned these procedures, and let's cross fingers that this just keeps growing. I mean, look at a year ago, Utah wouldn't even protect women's sports. And now look, because of people like you, Luka. So thank you very much. I hope you have a great, well, you're probably going to go to bed after this, but
I am too.
I look forward to talking to you. Thanks everyone for watching. I'll probably do some clips out of this, shorten it up. And Luka, I know that we would love for you to come on Wisconsin right now in the coming weeks with my friends Jim and Jessica. They were unavailable tonight, but I'm really glad, Stephanie, that you were able to fill in.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to be on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great. So good night, everybody. God bless, and see you later. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Scarlett.
No, I usually don't end this, so now I'm going to end the broadcast.